The old grandfather clock in the hall chimed midnight, each resonant bong a hammer blow against the silent, cavernous house. Liam sat in the dark of his study, the only light a pale silver wash from the moon spilling across his mahogany desk. He had been staring at the same architectural drawing for 3 hours, but he hadn't seen a single line. His focus was entirely on the sound that had drifted in through the open French doors an hour ago, a sound that had frozen the blood in his veins and shattered the carefully constructed peace of his life. It was his wife's voice, Clara, a hushed, conspiratorial murmur from the stone patio, meant for someone else's ears, but finding his with devastating precision. "Don't worry, Marcus," she had whispered, her voice a silken thread of deceit. "It's the last big performance. After the vow renewal, everything will be solidified. He'll sign the post-nup addendum thinking it's just a formality for the trust." A pause, filled with the chirping of crickets that suddenly sounded like a screeching alarm. "Of course, I love you. It's just a few more months. Once the firm's assets are properly leveraged into the new family fund, Dad says we can move. He'll be left with his little drafting company, none the wiser. He's too simple to see it coming." Simple. The word echoed in the silent study. It was the word her father, Richard, had used to describe him for a decade. A simple, earnest man. A good man, but simple. Not a man of vision or ambition. Not like them. Liam's hand rested on a worn leather portfolio on his desk. Its surface was smooth and cool beneath his trembling fingers. Inside that portfolio was a truth so complex, so vast, that it would have buckled the foundations of their arrogant world. They thought he was a quaint architect running a boutique firm that barely broke even. They thought the house they were in, the cars they drove, the lavish party planned for the next day, were all fruits of her family's dynastic wealth. They were wrong. And tomorrow, at the grand spectacle designed to celebrate their 10-year lie, he would show them just how wrong they were. He would still show up. He would stand beside her, look into her eyes, and give his vows. But they would not be the vows she was expecting. It's a story as old as time, isn't it? The sting of betrayal, the ache of being underestimated. Have you ever been in a position where people completely misjudged who you were? Let me know down in the comments where you're watching from. I love to see how far these stories travel. And if you enjoy watching Pride come before a fall, you're going to want to stick around. Be sure to like this video and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss what happens next. Now, let's get back to the moment the world shifted. The rehearsal dinner earlier that evening had been the overture to the Opera of Deceit. It was held at Richard and Eleanor's country club, a place that smelled of old money, lemon polish, and quiet disdain. Liam had sat at the head table next to Clara, a placid smile fixed on his face as a shield. He had long ago mastered the art of appearing serene while his mind catalogued every slight, every condescending remark, not with anger, but with the dispassionate clarity of an engineer assessing structural weaknesses. Richard, a man whose posture seemed permanently locked in a state of looking down his nose, had stood to give a toast. He raised his crystal glass of champagne, the bubbles catching the light. "To Clara and Liam," he began, his voice booming with false magnanimity. 10 years. A remarkable achievement in this day and age. He paused, letting his gaze sweep over the assembled guests before it landed on Liam, a twinkle of something sharp and unkind in his eyes. "When my daughter first brought Liam home, I'll admit, I was concerned. He was a quiet boy. An artist," he said the word artist, as if it were a communicable disease. "He didn't have the usual fire, the hunger for conquest that defines a man of substance." A few of Richard's cronies chuckled knowingly. Liam felt Clara's hand on his thigh, a light squeeze that was meant to be reassuring but felt more like a warning to keep his composure. He didn't need it. His composure was a fortress. "But," Richard continued, his voice softening into a tone of paternalistic wisdom, "Clara has always had a good heart. She chose love over, let's say, practicality. And she has built a beautiful life for them." He gestured around the opulent room. "She has provided a foundation upon which even the most modest of dreams can be built." The implication was clear. Clara, and by extension her family's money, was the foundation. Liam was merely the decorative, modest dream she had chosen to build upon it. The guests applauded politely. Liam took a slow sip of his water, the cold liquid a welcome anchor in the warm, cloying atmosphere of condescension. He met Richard's gaze across the table and gave him a small, respectful nod. It was part of the character he played, the grateful, slightly overwhelmed husband who knew he had married up. The performance had to be flawless, right up until the final act. Later, as dessert was served, a ridiculously complex raspberry mousse tower. Clara's aunt, a woman named Patricia who wore her diamonds like armor, had cornered him by the bar. "Liam, dear," she cooed, her voice dripping with saccharine pity. "Clara tells me your little firm has a new project. A library renovation for a small town upstate? How lovely. It must be so rewarding to work on such quaint community projects." "It has its moments," Liam had replied, his voice even. He didn't mention that the small town was a billionaire's enclave or that the renovation was a state-of-the-art $50 million cultural center he had designed from the ground up under a subsidiary name, a project that had won 3 international awards that were, at this very moment, sitting in a box in the back of his closet. "Well, you must let Richard know if you ever need a hand with the business side of things," Patricia said, patting his arm. "Ambition isn't a dirty word, you know. Sometimes you just need a little push from the right people." The humiliation was a slow-drip poison. It never came in a single, fatal dose. It was in the casual assumptions, the backhanded compliments, the pervasive, unspoken belief that he was a charity case, a pet project Clara had taken on. For years, he had swallowed it. He had told himself it didn't matter what they thought, as long as Clara knew the truth. He had believed she was his partner, his sanctuary from their judgment. He thought they were a team, secretly building an empire of their own, while her family remained blissfully ignorant. He had planned to reveal the full extent of his success to her on this very anniversary, a grand romantic gesture. He'd imagined laying the portfolio on their bed, opening it, and watching her face light up as she realized the man she married was not the simple architect her father pitied, but a titan in his own right. He had imagined her pride, her joy, her shock. Now, sitting in his study, the memory of her voice on the phone, that cold, calculating tone, played over and over in his mind. He's too simple to see it coming. It wasn't that she was merely ignorant of his success. She was actively betting against him. She was leveraging his perceived simplicity to defraud him. The party, the vows, the post-nup addendum. It was all a stage play for the final act of her betrayal. A cold fury, clean and sharp as a shard of glass, cut through his grief. He had been mourning the death of a marriage that had, in reality, been a ghost for years. The woman he loved had been an illusion. The woman who lived in his house, who shared his bed, was a stranger, predator. And tomorrow she was walking into a trap of her own making. He stood up, the chair scraping softly against the hardwood floor. He walked over to the French doors and looked out at the stone patio. The chair she had been sitting in was still slightly askew. He could almost see her there, phone pressed to her ear, weaving her web of lies under the silvery moon. He felt a profound sense of pity for her, not for the consequences she was about to face, but for the hollowness of her own soul. A person who saw love as a transaction, marriage as a long con, and a partner as a mark, was a person who could never truly possess anything of value. He turned back to his desk and picked up the leather portfolio. He didn't need to review its contents. He knew them by heart. The portfolio wasn't just a collection of documents. It was the story of his life for the past 10 years. The life he had lived in the shadows, the success he had built in silence. It contained the incorporation papers for his parent company, a holding entity named Ethelred Holdings, a quiet nod to his Anglo-Saxon history professor father. It contained the deeds to properties across the country, the schematics for landmark buildings designed under pseudonyms, the stock certificates for tech startups he had invested in years before they became household names, and the final signed acquisition agreement for Sterling Wakefield, the very development firm Richard had been boasting about trying to land a meeting with for the past 6 months. He had kept it all hidden for a reason that had once seemed noble. He had seen how Clara's family equated worth with wealth, and he wanted his wife's love to be for him alone, untainted by the knowledge of his growing fortune. He wanted to build a life with her based on genuine connection, not a balance sheet. He had been waiting for the moment when he felt their foundation was strong enough to bear the weight of the truth. What a fool he'd been. The foundation was sand, and the tide was her greed. The grandfather clock chimed once, marking the half-hour. 12:30. In less than 12 hours, he would be standing in a beautifully manicured garden, surrounded by 150 people, and he would set the record straight. He placed the portfolio on the corner of his desk, ready for the morning. He walked out of the study, turning off the single desk lamp, and the room was plunged back into darkness. As he ascended the grand, curving staircase, a staircase he had designed himself, its structure a marvel of cantilevered engineering they all took for granted, he felt a strange sense of peace settle over him. The grief was still there, a dull ache behind his ribs, but the uncertainty was gone. He knew exactly who he was, and he knew exactly what he had to do. The performance was not over. His final act was yet to come. He reached the top of the stairs and paused outside their bedroom door. He could hear the soft sound of her breathing within. He wondered if she was dreaming. Perhaps she was dreaming of Marcus, or of the money she thought she was about to secure. Her dreams, like her plans, were built on a lie, and lies, like poorly constructed buildings, could never withstand the simple, unyielding force of the truth. He turned and walked down the hall to the guest room. Tonight he would sleep alone. Tomorrow he would stand alone. And for the first time in a very long time, he felt perfectly fine with that. The quiet of the guest room was a comfort, a clean slate. The sheets were cool and crisp. As he lay down, he didn't feel like a victim on the eve of his own execution. He felt like a general on the eve of a battle he knew, with absolute certainty, he was going to win. Clara came into the guest room just after dawn. The door opened with a soft click, and Liam, who had been awake for hours watching the light change, didn't move. He kept his breathing even, feigning sleep. He felt her presence by the bed, a shadow in the pale morning light. "Liam?" she whispered. Her voice was soft, laced with a feigned concern that now sounded grotesque to his ears. "Are you okay? I woke up and you weren't there." He let out a slow breath and shifted, as if just waking. He opened his eyes and looked at her. She was already partially made up, her hair in soft rollers. She was wearing a silk robe that he had bought her in Italy. A trip she had complained was too rustic. She looked beautiful, and he felt nothing. The emotional connection had been severed as cleanly as if by a surgeon's scalpel. "I couldn't sleep," he said, his voice raspy. "Just pre-ceremony nerves, I guess." She smiled, a perfect, practiced expression that didn't reach her eyes. "Oh, honey, don't be nervous. It's just a party. A celebration of us." She sat on the edge of the bed, the mattress dipping with her weight. She ran a hand through his hair. Her touch felt alien. "Everything is going to be perfect. Dad has arranged everything. The flowers, the catering. It will be the event of the season." Of course, her father had arranged everything. It was essential to the narrative that Liam be seen as the passive beneficiary of their largesse. He had, in fact, anonymously paid the vendors himself through one of his company's charitable arms, a final, silent act of irony. The bills Richard thought he was paying were elaborate forgeries created by Liam's forensic accounting team. Richard was simply transferring money between two of his own accounts, a charade Liam had set up months ago as a contingency. He had hoped it would be a funny secret to share with Clara one day. Now it was just another piece of evidence. "I know you don't care for all this fanfare," she continued, her voice dropping into a sympathetic purr. "You're so grounded, so above it all. It's one of the things I love about you." The lies were so effortless, so constant. He wondered if she even knew when she was telling them anymore. He sat up, swinging his legs over the side of the bed. "I should get ready. Don't want to be late." "I've laid out your suit," she said, standing up. "The blue one. It brings out your eyes." She paused at the door. "Liam, today is about us, about our future. I've never been more sure about it." Her parting shot was delivered with such sincerity that a lesser man might have doubted himself, might have wondered if he had misheard the phone call, if it was all a terrible misunderstanding. But Liam's mind was a vault. He could still hear the name Marcus. He could still hear the phrase too simple to see it coming. Her certainty was not about their future. It was about her future. He stood under the hot spray of the shower, letting the water sluice over him. He wasn't washing away nerves. He was washing away the last 10 years of naivete. He had been so blind, so determined to believe in the story he wanted to be true. The signs had all been there, small cracks in the facade he had willfully ignored. The way she subtly belittled his work in front of her friends. The way her affection seemed to wax and wane in correlation with her father's approval of him. The separate bank accounts she insisted on maintaining. For independence, she'd said. He had seen it all as quirks, as the baggage from her upbringing. He had not seen it for what it was, a long-term strategy. Dressed in the blue suit she had chosen, he looked at himself in the mirror. The man looking back was not the same man who had woken up yesterday. This man's eyes were clear, his jaw was set. The pleasant, slightly soft mask of the simple architect was gone. In its place was the face of the CEO of Ethelred Holdings, a man who oversaw a multi-billion-dollar portfolio, a man who could build cities and dismantle empires with equal precision. Today, he would be dismantling his own life to build a new one from the rubble. He went back to his study. The room was now bright with morning sun. He picked up the leather portfolio. It felt heavy in his hand, weighted with the power of the truth it contained. He tucked it under his arm and walked downstairs. The house was already buzzing with activity. Caterers moved with silent efficiency. Florists were putting the finishing touches on extravagant arrangements of white roses and lilies. Clara, now in a different silk robe, was directing them with the air of a queen overseeing her court. She saw him and her face lit up with another one of her brilliant, hollow smiles. "There you are. Doesn't it all look wonderful?" she asked, sweeping an arm around. "It's very impressive," he said, his tone neutral. Her father, Richard, strode in from the patio, already dressed in a tailored morning coat. He was holding a phone to his ear, barking orders. He saw Liam and his expression soured slightly. "Liam, good. You're ready," he said, as if Liam's punctuality was a pleasant surprise. "Try to stay out of the way. We have professionals handling things." He then turned his back, already dismissing Liam, and resumed his phone call. No, that's unacceptable. The vintage has to be the '08. I will not have my guests drinking inferior champagne." Liam watched him for a moment, this peacock of a man, so utterly convinced of his own superiority. Richard's entire identity was built on the illusion of control, of being the most important man in any room. The knowledge that in a few short hours, he would hold this man's entire professional legacy in the palm of his hand was a sobering, rather than exhilarating thought. This wasn't a game. It was a demolition. Eleanor, Clara's mother, drifted into the room. She was a pale, anxious woman who seemed to exist in a perpetual state of trying to smooth things over. She gave Liam a watery smile. "Liam, dear, you look so handsome. Are you excited?" "I'm ready for the day to begin, Eleanor," he said. It was the truest thing he had said all morning. She patted his arm, her eyes darting nervously towards her husband and daughter, as if ensuring she was performing her role correctly. "It's all just so wonderful. Clara deserves this. She deserves to be happy." Her words, meant to be kind, were a small, sharp jab. Clara deserves this. The assumption, as always, was that Clara's happiness was the central purpose of their universe, and everyone else was a supporting player in her story. He looked at Eleanor, the silent enabler, the woman who had watched her husband and daughter belittle and dismiss him for a decade and had never once said a word. Her sin was not of commission but of omission, and in some ways that was the most profound cowardice of all. He knew that when the truth came out, her world would be shattered just as much as Richard's or Clara's. She had chosen her side long ago by choosing silence. He gave her a polite nod and walked out onto the patio. The preparations for the ceremony were nearly complete. Rows of white chairs faced a floral archway, overlooking the vast, sparkling lake that bordered their property. It was a perfect picture, a scene from a magazine. Perfect, beautiful lie. He found a quiet corner and stood there, the portfolio held firmly at his side. He watched the final preparations unfold, a silent observer at his own public execution. Or perhaps his own resurrection. He wasn't sure which yet. He just knew that by the time the sun set, nothing would ever be the same. The quiet before the storm was almost over. The first guests were beginning to arrive. The sun climbed higher, a brilliant, unforgiving eye in a cloudless sky. Guests trickled in, a murmuring river of pastel dresses and crisp linen suits, their laughter and polite chatter filling the manicured gardens. They were the elite of their small, wealthy city. Bankers, surgeons, legacy heirs, and their immaculately preserved spouses. They were Richard and Clara's people. Liam knew few of them well. He was a novelty, Clara's artistic husband, a man they greeted with a mixture of curiosity and condescension. He stood near the back, by a large oak tree that provided a sliver of shade, watching them find their seats. He saw Richard moving through the crowd, accepting congratulations, his chest puffed out with pride. He saw Eleanor fluttering from group to group, her face a mask of anxious hospitality. And he saw Clara, who had disappeared an hour ago to get dressed, finally emerge from the house. A collective gasp went through the crowd. She was a vision. Her dress was a custom creation of lace and silk that seemed to float around her. Her hair was swept up, revealing a string of diamonds, a gift from her father, no doubt, that glittered at her throat. She smiled, a radiant, triumphant smile, and began to greet her guests. She was the star of the show, and she was playing her part to perfection. Liam watched her, and the last vestiges of his sorrow evaporated, replaced by a cold, hard clarity. This was what she lived for. The admiration, the envy, the public validation of her status. The marriage, the vows, he himself. They were all just props in the grand theater of her life. He was not her partner. He was her accessory. His phone vibrated in his pocket. He pulled it out. It was a text from a number he knew well. Harrison. Landed. Awaiting your signal. Liam typed a quick reply. Liam. Thank you for coming. Please enjoy the champagne. The show will begin shortly. He put the phone away. Mr. Harrison, Arthur Harrison, was the final piece on the chessboard. A legendary, semi-retired venture capitalist, Harrison was a kingmaker. A man whose reputation was so immense that even Richard spoke his name with a reverence bordering on fear. Richard had been trying to get a meeting with him for years. What Richard didn't know was that Arthur Harrison had been Liam's mentor since college and was the primary investor in Ethelred Holdings. He was more than a mentor. He was the father Liam had never had. His presence today was an act of profound loyalty. A string quartet began to play a soft, classical piece. It was the signal. Guests settled into their seats. Richard walked to the front and took his place. The officiant, a man with a kind, bland face whom Liam had never met, stood under the floral arch. The moment was approaching. Liam walked from the shade of the oak tree and took his position at the front, next to the officiant. He squared his shoulders and faced the aisle. His heart was beating a slow, steady rhythm. The nervousness he'd felt in the past at public events was gone. There is a unique calm that comes from having absolutely nothing left to lose. The music swelled. The crowd turned, and Clara began her walk down the aisle, on the arm of a beaming Richard. Every eye was on her. She looked ethereal, an angel of lace and lies. As she walked, her eyes were fixed on Liam. The smile she gave him was intimate, meant only for him. It was the smile that had once made his world turn. Now it was just data, a calculated gesture in a long series of calculations. Richard delivered her to the front, placing her hand in Liam's. "Take care of my daughter," he whispered, his voice thick with emotion. It was a command, not a request. "I will give her exactly what she deserves," Liam replied, his voice low and even. Richard, lost in the emotion of the moment, simply nodded, mistaking the words for a promise of devotion. He squeezed Liam's shoulder and took his seat in the front row. Liam turned to face Clara. He looked into her eyes, deep blue pools of carefully constructed innocence. Her hand was cool in his. "You look beautiful," he said, and she did. She was a beautiful ruin. "You're shaking," she whispered, a flicker of concern in her eyes, or perhaps it was satisfaction. The simple, nervous husband, overwhelmed by the grandeur of it all. "I'm not," he said. "I've never been steadier." The officiant began to speak, his voice a gentle, meaningless drone. He spoke of love, of partnership, of the sacred journey of marriage. Liam let the words wash over him. He kept his eyes on Clara, watching her subtle reactions. She was glowing, soaking in the public adoration. This was her victory lap, the culmination of her 10-year plan. She thought she was just moments away from securing her future. She had no idea she was standing on a precipice, and he was about to ask her to take one final step. The officiant turned to him. "Liam, will you now share the vows you have written for Clara?" This was it, the moment of truth. The air was still. The only sounds were the soft lapping of the lake and the distant cry of a loon. He turned slightly and nodded to the officiant. He did not take a piece of paper from his pocket. Instead, he reached down and picked up the worn leather portfolio he had placed on a small table beside him. A murmur went through the front rows. Clara's perfect smile faltered for a fraction of a second. She shot him a questioning look. "What are you doing?" He gave her a calm, reassuring smile, the last one he would ever give her. He opened the portfolio. The pages within were not filled with prose, but with legal documents, financial statements, and architectural blueprints. He cleared his throat. His voice, when he spoke, was not loud, but it carried a new weight, a new authority that cut through the warm afternoon air. Every guest leaned forward, sensing a shift in the atmosphere. The play was deviating from the script. "Clara," he began, his eyes locking onto hers. "When I thought about what to say today, I realized that our 10 years together have been an education, and I want to thank you and your family for the lessons you have taught me. You taught me a great deal about value." He paused, letting the word hang in the air. Richard, in the front row, puffed up slightly, assuming the compliment was for him. Clara's smile returned, though it was now a little tighter, a little more questioning. "Your father," Liam said, his gaze shifting to Richard for a moment, "taught me that to a certain kind of man, a person's value is measured by their hunger for conquest. Their ambition," he looked back at Clara. "You taught me that my own ambitions were quaint, that my work was sweet, that my firm was a lovely little hobby." The words, her own words, thrown back at her in this public forum, made her flinch. The color began to drain from her face. Richard's proud smile froze, his eyes narrowing. He was beginning to understand that this was not the speech of a grateful son-in-law. "For 10 years, I've allowed you to believe that," Liam continued, his voice as calm as the lake behind him. "I allowed you to believe that my little hobby was just that, a modest enterprise that could barely support us, while we lived off the generosity of your family." He lifted a page from the portfolio. It was a consolidated financial statement. "I allowed you to believe this, even as my quaint firm, operating under the name Ethelred Holdings, was quietly posting a net profit of over $90 million last year." A collective, audible gasp swept through the crowd. It was a sound Liam would never forget. The sound of 150 realities simultaneously shattering. Clara's face had gone from pale to ashen. Her mouth opened slightly, but no words came out. She looked like she had been struck. Richard shot to his feet. "What is this nonsense?" he boomed, his face turning a blotchy red. "What kind of sick joke is this, Liam?" Liam didn't look at him. His focus remained entirely on his wife. "It's no joke, Richard. Please sit down." The vows aren't over. His voice held a command that was so unexpected, so absolute, that Richard, after a moment of sputtering, sank back into his chair, stunned into silence. Liam turned the page in his portfolio. You see, Clara, you taught me the value of appearances, the importance of a good story, so I created one. The story of the simple, struggling architect. And it was a very effective story. It allowed me to work without the distractions of your family's expectations. He looked out at the crowd, his eyes sweeping over the stunned faces. It allowed Ethelred Holdings to design and build the new Takeda Tower in Tokyo, the Helios Resort in the Maldives, and the National Pediatric Research Hospital in Baltimore that many of you in this very audience have donated to. The name-dropping was surgical. He was connecting his secret identity to projects they all knew, landmarks of wealth and prestige they all respected. He was rewriting their perception of him in real time. Then he turned his attention back to Richard, who looked like he was having trouble breathing. Richard, you taught me that business is about conquest. You've spoken for months about your desire to partner with Sterling Wakefield Development. You said it would be the crowning achievement of your career. Liam lifted the final document from the portfolio. It was thick, bound in blue legal paper. I'm afraid that partnership won't be possible. You see, as of 9 a.m. yesterday morning, Ethelred Holdings completed its acquisition of Sterling Wakefield. The deal was valued at $12 billion. He placed the document back in the portfolio with a soft, final thud. He looked directly at the man who had called him simple for a decade. So you see, Richard, I learned your lesson well. I just believe in a quieter form of conquest. The silence that followed was absolute. It was a vacuum, devoid of air, of sound, of anything but pure, unadulterated shock. Richard's face had gone from red to a terrifying, waxy white. Eleanor had her hand over her mouth, her eyes wide with horror. The guests were frozen, their faces a gallery of disbelief. They were not just watching a marriage implode. They were watching their entire social hierarchy be dismantled and reassembled before their very eyes. The quaint architect was a king, and they had never even seen his crown. But Liam was not finished. He had saved the most important lesson for last. He turned back to Clara. Her beautiful face was now a twisted mask of confusion and dawning terror. The fantasy was crumbling around her, and she didn't understand how. His voice, when he spoke again, was softer, laced with a genuine, cutting sorrow. But the most important lesson you taught me, Clara, was about loyalty. He let the word twist in the air between them. Her eyes darted around frantically, as if looking for an escape. There was none. You taught me that loyalty can be a performance, a role you play until the time is right. He paused, his gaze unwavering. Like the one you gave last night on the phone on the patio. The one where you told Marcus that you loved him. The one where you explained your plan to have me sign a post-nup addendum that would give your father's new family fund access to my assets. The fund you would both control after you left me. He didn't need to raise his voice. The quiet words were more devastating than any shout. He watched the final vestiges of her composure disintegrate. The truth landed, and it detonated the last of her defenses. Her carefully constructed world, her beauty, her status, her plans. It all turned to dust in that single horrifying moment of exposure. You said, he concluded, his voice barely a whisper now, but every person in the garden heard it as if it were a thunderclap, that I was too simple to see it coming. He looked deep into her eyes, the eyes of a stranger. That was the last lesson you taught me, Clara. You taught me that I was. He closed the leather portfolio. The sound of the clasp clicking shut was the only sound in the world. It was the sound of a door closing, the sound of a life ending, the sound of a new one beginning. The vows were complete. The silence broke. It was not a gradual return to sound, but a violent shattering. Clara let out a choked, guttural sob, a sound of pure animal panic. No, she gasped, shaking her head, her eyes wild. No, you're lying. Liam, you're lying. Richard surged to his feet again, his face a contorted mask of rage and disbelief. He's a liar. This is slander. My lawyers will ruin you, he bellowed, his voice cracking. He pointed a trembling finger at Liam. You are nothing, a pathetic little man making up fantasies. The guests began to murmur, a rising tide of confusion and scandal. Some looked horrified, others morbidly fascinated. This was a drama far more riveting than they could have imagined. Liam remained perfectly still amidst the chaos, a calm island in a raging sea. He didn't need to defend himself. He had planned for this moment. He had planned for their denial. He gave a small, almost imperceptible nod towards the back of the crowd. And then, a new voice cut through the noise. It was calm, measured, and carried an unmistakable weight of authority. "I can assure you, Richard, he is not lying." Every head turned. A man was walking slowly down the center aisle, which was now a path through a sea of stunned faces. He was older, with a shock of white hair and eyes that seemed to see everything. He wore a simple, impeccably tailored gray suit. It was Arthur Harrison. A wave of recognition and awe rippled through the guests. This was a man most of them had only ever seen in the pages of Forbes or the Wall Street Journal. His presence here was like a deity descending from Olympus. Richard froze, his mouth agape. Mr. Harrison? What are you doing here?" Arthur Harrison stopped beside Liam. He placed a paternal hand on Liam's shoulder, a simple gesture that spoke volumes. It was a public anointing. He looked at Richard, and his expression was not angry, but filled with a profound disappointment that was somehow far worse. "I am here as a guest of my friend and business partner, Liam," he said, his voice quiet but projecting to every corner of the garden. "I am the primary investor in Ethelred Holdings, and I have been Liam's mentor since he was a 19-year-old architectural prodigy at university." He let that sink in. "And I personally oversaw the final stages of the Sterling Wakefield acquisition. It is, I assure you, very real." Richard looked as if he had been physically struck. He staggered back a step, catching himself on his chair. The fight went out of him, replaced by a gray, gaping void of utter defeat. The man he idolized, the man he had chased for years, was standing here, allied with the man he had dismissed as a simpleton. It was a complete, systemic annihilation of his entire worldview. Arthur Harrison then turned his cool, discerning gaze upon Clara. Her sobs had subsided into ragged, hitching breaths. She was staring at Liam, her expression a maelstrom of terror, disbelief, and a dawning, horrifying understanding. "As for the other matters," Harrison said, his voice softening slightly but losing none of its steel, "Liam's security team made a recording of your phone call last night, Mrs. Abbott. A precaution, given some financial irregularities we had noticed. It is quite clear." The final nail. Clara crumpled. Her knees gave way, and she would have collapsed onto the grass had her maid of honor not rushed forward to catch her. The beautiful dress was now just a costume on a broken doll. The performance was over. Liam looked at the wreckage. He looked at Clara, sobbing incoherently. He looked at Richard, who had sunk into his chair, a shrunken, defeated old man. He looked at Eleanor, who was staring into the middle distance, her face a blank canvas of shock, as if her mind had simply shut down to protect itself from the unbearable reality. He felt a deep, profound wave of nothing. Not triumph, not satisfaction, not even anger, just a vast, empty sadness for the waste of it all, for the years lost, for the love he thought was real, for the people who had chosen greed over grace. He turned to Arthur Harrison. "Thank you for being here, Arthur," he said quietly. "I wouldn't have missed it, son," Arthur replied, his voice full of warmth. "Now, let's get you out of here." Liam took one last look at the scene. The floral arch, the white chairs, the shimmering lake. Perfect setting for a tragedy. He turned his back on it all. He turned his back on Clara, on her family, on the 10 years of lies. He left the portfolio on the small table, a silent testament to the truth. He didn't need it anymore. With Arthur Harrison at his side, he began to walk up the aisle, away from the ceremony. The guests parted for them as if they were royalty, their faces a mixture of awe, pity, and fear. He didn't look at any of them. He kept his eyes fixed on the path ahead. As he walked, he felt the weight of the last decade lift from his shoulders. He was walking away from a life that had never truly been his, and towards one that was authentically, completely his own. The air had never tasted so clean. The future had never seemed so bright. The quiet after the storm had finally arrived. The weeks that followed were a blur of legal proceedings and seismic shifts, both personal and professional. Liam moved out of the grand house by the lake that very afternoon, taking only his clothes, his books, and the contents of his study. He left everything else. The furniture, the art, the cars, they were all things purchased for a life that was a lie, and he wanted no part of them. He moved into a sleek, minimalist penthouse apartment in the city center, a property Ethelred Holdings kept for visiting executives. From its floor-to-ceiling windows, he could see the entire city skyline, including 3 buildings he had designed. It was a view of his own making. His lawyers, a team as sharp and precise as his own architectural designs, handled the divorce. Clara, guided by a frantic Richard, initially tried to fight, to claim half of the Ethelred fortune. But the evidence was insurmountable. The prenuptial agreement, which Richard himself had insisted upon 10 years ago to protect Clara's family assets from the simple architect, was ironclad. And the recording of her phone call with Marcus, coupled with the evidence of her conspiracy to commit fraud, left her with no leverage. She was left with a fraction of what she had schemed for, a settlement Liam insisted upon against his lawyer's advice. It was enough for her to live comfortably, but not lavishly. It was not enough to maintain the lifestyle she had built her identity around. It was, he felt, a just and fitting outcome. He did not want to destroy her, only to disentangle himself from her. There was a difference between justice and revenge, and Liam was only interested in the former. The fallout in Richard's world was catastrophic. The news of the Sterling Wakefield acquisition by an unknown entity named Ethelred Holdings, run by his supposedly humble son-in-law, became the biggest story in the city's financial circles. The humiliation was absolute. His reputation as a shrewd, powerful man was shattered overnight. He became a laughingstock, the man who had the Midas touch in his own family and never even knew it. His business partners grew wary, his credit lines tightened, and several key deals he had been working on collapsed. He had built his empire on the perception of strength, and Liam had exposed it as a hollow facade. Richard had not been conquered by a rival. He had been undone by his own arrogance. Eleanor, according to reports from mutual acquaintances, had withdrawn completely. She had spent a decade as a silent partner in her family's cruelty, and when the truth came out, she had no moral foundation to stand on. She was adrift in the wreckage her silence had condoned. Liam felt a flicker of pity for her, but it was fleeting. She had made her choices, or rather, had chosen not to make any, which was a choice in itself. As for Clara, her social world evaporated. The friends who had flocked to her lavish parties now avoided her calls. She was no longer the princess of a powerful dynasty. She was the star of a sordid scandal. Her affair with Marcus ended abruptly. He was, it turned out, just as opportunistic as she was, and he vanished the moment the promise of Liam's fortune disappeared. She was left alone with the consequences of her own character. Liam heard she had sold the house and moved to a smaller condo across town. Sometimes, late at night, he wondered if she ever felt remorse, or only regret at being caught. He suspected it was the latter. One crisp autumn afternoon, 2 months after the vow renewal that never was, Liam was in his new office. It was a corner space, vast and clean, with panoramic views. The walls were mostly glass, a testament to his belief in transparency. The awards that had once been hidden in a closet were now displayed on a simple shelf. Not as trophies, but as reminders of the work he was proud of, the work he no longer had to hide. His assistant buzzed him. "Mr. Harrison is here to see you." Arthur walked in, looking as vital as ever. He surveyed the office with an approving nod. "Good. You're finally living in a space that reflects you. Honest. Clear views." "I'm learning to appreciate transparency," Liam said with a small smile. They sat in the comfortable chairs near the window, a pot of tea between them. They spoke of business for a while, the smooth integration of Sterling Wakefield, a new green energy project in Scandinavia, the rising stock price of Ethelred. The company, now operating openly under its own name, was more successful than ever. Finally, Arthur leaned back, his expression turning more personal. "And how are you, Liam?" "Truly." Liam considered the question. He looked out the window at the city sprawling below. "I'm free," he said, the word feeling solid and true. "I spent so many years contorting myself to fit into a space that was never meant for me. I was so afraid of their judgment, of their values, that I hid the best parts of myself. I thought I was protecting my marriage, but I was just suffocating myself." He took a sip of tea. "The irony is, I thought revealing my success would be the ultimate gift to her. I thought it would finally make her father respect me, and that would make her happy. I never stopped to ask if I should have to buy their respect in the first place. Respect that's for sale isn't worth the price," Arthur said wisely. "Exactly," Liam agreed. The pain of the betrayal was immense, but it was also a gift. It forced me to see the truth that was right in front of me all along. I wasn't in a partnership. I was an asset being cultivated for a hostile takeover. He shook his head, not with anger, but with a sense of wonder at his own past blindness. What they didn't understand is that my real value wasn't in the portfolio. It was never about the money. It's about the ability to create, to build things of integrity and beauty. They can't see that. They can only see the price tag." He fell silent for a moment, watching the cars move like tiny blood cells through the arteries of the city below. "I don't hate them," he said finally. "I pity them. They live in a world that's so small, a prison of their own making, where the only thing that matters is status and appearance. They'll never know the joy of building something with your own hands, of creating value where there was none before. They are not creators. They are just consumers of other people's success." He stood up and walked to the window, placing his hand on the cool glass. He was not just looking at the city, he was looking at his future. A future he would build on his own terms in the full light of day. The simple architect was gone. The hidden CEO was gone. In their place was just Liam Abbott, a man who knew his own worth, a man who was finally and completely himself. The foundation of his new life was not sand or secrets, but the bedrock of his own integrity. And he knew, with a certainty that settled deep in his bones, that it was a structure that would stand forever. The story of Liam and Clara is a powerful reminder that true worth is not determined by the opinions of others or the glitter of material wealth. It's forged in integrity, patience, and the quiet dignity with which we face our trials. Liam's victory wasn't just in exposing a lie, but in reclaiming his own truth and refusing to let bitterness corrupt him. He chose justice over revenge, and in doing so, he built a future far grander than any building he could ever design. What do you think is the most important lesson from this story? Is it about the danger of underestimating people, or the importance of living an authentic life? I'd love to read your thoughts in the comments below. Thank you for joining me on this journey. If you found this story compelling, please give it a like and subscribe to the channel for more tales of karma, justice, and the quiet strength that lies within us all. Until next time, remember to build your own life on a foundation of truth. It's the only one that will truly last.